My name is Aaliyah Monroe. I'm 33. And this is what happened to me. The penthouse had the kind of silence you can hear breathing. I stood barefoot in the kitchen, slicing cucumbers like I was defusing a bomb. Steady hands, no shaking. From the playroom down the hall came the soft, conspiratorial giggles of my twins, Akamara and Aigai Yamine Eve. The kind of joy that slips under doors and reminds you why you keep going. I caught my reflection in the oven door, a woman I recognized in shape, but not in light. A wife tucked behind curtains because her husband preferred an audience to a family. If you're feeling this story, subscribe to Principled Stories and tap like. YouTube's algorithm might not show us to you again, and we share powerful stories from around the world every week. Upstairs, the footsteps started, the way they do when a storm is pacing out the math of how it's going to land. Is Sterling Voss there? My husband, CEO of UVOS Dynamics, came down the stairs with a credit card statement pinched between two fingers like it offended him by existing. His suit was crisp midnight. His mouth was winter. $600 on skincare? His voice was a courtroom. For me, I said, moisturizer. Serum. He didn't look at my face. He looked at my hands. Brown, veined from bottles and bedtime braids and chopping and cleaning and staying. And he smiled without moving his eyes. Aaliyah, you don't need products. You need to understand optics. Optics. He loved that word. I lined the forks as if straight silver could keep a marriage from going crooked. What optics, I asked, make a man hide his wife and daughters? He didn't flinch. My investors buy a specific image. The board prefers simplicity. One story, no distractions. Your black family is a distraction? His jaw flexed. He aimed for gentle and landed on condescension. You're making this about race again. I'm not making it about race, I said, voice level. The world is. You're agreeing with it. He held up the statement. You can't just spend like this when you're not public-facing. Public-facing, I repeated, tasting the varnish on the words. I thought of the gala on Friday, the one he said I wouldn't enjoy, the one he planned to attend, with Ichet Sloan Whitfielder fee, a blonde with teeth like headlines and a handshake like a door closing. He put the paper down and slid his ring around his finger like he was reminding it who it belonged to. Aaliyah, you know I'm protecting you and the girls from noise. Noise? I said softly. Or visibility? He exhaled through his nose, the way he did when a junior analyst confused margin and markup. Let's not fight. Then he kissed the air near my cheek, straightened his cuff, and left the room as if I were furniture arranged slightly off-brand. In the hall, little feet pattered. Amara appeared first, curls escaping her bonnet. Mommy, can we make a castle? Amina arrived right behind her with a cardboard box and a marker she wasn't supposed to have. A pink one, she added, but powerful. I smiled with more courage than I felt. Let's make it so strong it scares dragons. We built a fortress out of boxes and tape and stubbornness. The girls thundered around it with markers, crowning it with plastic tiaras and a wooden spoon flag that read Girls Only. When they finally fell asleep, soft and tangled on their rainbow rug, I sat on the floor beside them and let the quiet press against my ribs. My phone buzzed. Ew, Kendra Price Wadi. Friend. Since freshman year dorm rooms and ramen. You breathing, Laya? Barely. The say, when. I'll take the twins tomorrow. No questions, no schedule, no apologies. Tomorrow. Please. I didn't cry. Not then. The tears would have felt like permission slip signatures, and I wasn't giving anyone written consent to break me. The next morning was gray, the kind of light that makes cities honest. Kendra arrived in a whirlwind. Sweats, scarf, lip balm that smelled like citrus. My babies. She sang, scooping Amara and Amina into the hug of the century. Auntie Ken is kidnapping you for pancakes, glitter, and poor decisions. Amina clapped. Glitter is a good decision. Kendra winked at me over their heads. I go do the thing you've been pretending you can't do. After the door shut, the apartment changed temperature. It wasn't emptier, it was wider. I took a shower that wasn't triage. I dressed for a meeting with myself. Dark jeans, crisp white shirt, coat the color of courage. On the way out, I paused at the hall mirror. My hair was a long, careful compromise. Sterling always insisted photographed soft. I gathered it into a grip and held. My scalp felt like it exhaled. The city met me at the curb with a horn and a prayer. I walked until decisions started speaking. First, Weibel weather shoes. There. What are we looking for? The clerk asked, eyes bright. Elevation, I said. 5 inches. Balanced. Ankle doesn't wobble when the room does. She grinned. I have just the sermon. Patent black. A dangerous almond toe. A gold seam at the heel like a promise. When I stood in them, my spine remembered something my heart had forgotten. Upright was my natural setting. Second, if Maison Alouette, a boutique where the lighting made fabrics confess their intentions. My fingers found a dress before my eyes did. Deep carmine, architectural neckline, slit that said "I'll be taking up space now." In the mirror, my stretch marks looked like constellations. I traced them with my gaze the way you trace the sky to remember where you are. Third, du, at Studio Rook A. No appointment. The stylist, Fenno of Valahath, salt and pepper, tattoo of a tiny pair of scissors on his wrist, tilted his head. Day 1 or day done? I slid into the chair. Day 1. He covered me with the cape-like armor. What are we cutting? The distance between who I've been and who I am. He gathered the length and asked, ready? Yesterday, I said. When the first heavy section fell to the floor, I swear I felt gravity soften. He carved a precise angled bob. He warmed it with espresso gloss that turned my undertones into a dare. He blew it smooth until it looked like geometry and intention. Noah turned my chair toward the mirror. Meet the woman who does not apologize. I didn't cry then either. My throat burned, but not from sadness, from oxygen. I left with a small bag of products and a bigger bag of nerve. At a cafe window, I opened a new cream-covered notebook Kendra had given me for a birthday I'd been too tired to celebrate. On the first page, in block letters, "What you eat will not be curated." Under it, smaller, "Ethi watch me, eh." That night, the twins came home smelling like syrup and victory. Kendra stayed, feet on my couch like we were still 20. We ate takeout straight from the cartons. She listened without interrupting. When I was done, she said, if he can't be seen standing next to his own wife and black daughters, he doesn't deserve to be seen at all. I nodded, as if I were agreeing with the weather. The gala's Friday, I said. Then Friday is arrival, she replied. Do you want me front row or back up? Both, I said, smiling for the first time that day. The next 2 mornings I trained for calm. I walked in my heels around the apartment while packing school lunches. I practiced my lipstick, vas et rouge tenacity a, until my mouth looked like decisions. I sat in silence until adrenaline learned it was not in charge here. Sterling moved around me like a man living beside a closed door he didn't know how to open. On Thursday, he tried sincerity, the version brand consultants teach. You know the board's sensitive. You showing up could complicate things. There's a lot about me that complicates things, I said. I plan to enjoy it. He watched me, working a problem he'd always solved with power and finding it unresponsive. Aaliyah, be reasonable. Reasonable, I repeated. Like hiding the existence of your wife and black daughters because you're afraid their curls will smudge your metrics? He looked away. It's not like that, but it was like that. It had always been like that. The difference now was whether I was going to let it be. Friday arrived, dressed like a verdict. Kendra sent a selfie from her car with a bag of emergency bobby pins and a face that said Atri Mish. My mom texted a prayer and a heart. I kissed the twins' foreheads, memorized the honey brown of their eyes, and whispered, everything I do tonight is a note on your future. At 6:30, the driver Sterling booked rolled up to the curb. He was used to taking one passenger. He looked at me in the mirror and didn't hide the surprise that I existed. "Aber Rothborn Hodelfee, please," I said. The foyer was all marble hush and chandelier breath. Photographers clustered near the entrance like bright-eyed birds, craning for familiar feathers. I paused under the archway and felt my pulse slow to the tempo of my heels. I didn't enter. I arrived. Cameras swivel. Conversations faltered. You could hear the room adjust. Ms. A handler asked, uncertain. Ata Kalia Monroe Fee, I said, my voice steady enough to sign documents. Wife of Sterling Voss. A few heads snapped. A few mouths parted. One reporter's pen scrawled something so fast it squeaked. Across the hall, Sterling froze mid-chuckle, hand on Sloane Whitfield. His back like she might evaporate if not reminded she was welcome. Sloane looked over, took me in from hair to heel, and did a quick calculation. I watched her decide to smile wider. Sterling's eyes flickered. Shock, irritation, risk analysis, spin. He started toward me with that walk men use when they've learned rooms by force, not grace. The board chair, a Fellison Wardware, intercepted him, a hand briefly on his arm, an eyebrow traveling north. I reached Ellison first. Mr. Ward, I said, offering my hand. It's good to finally meet properly. He looked at my hand, then my face, then the room around us tilting like a mirror. He took it in both of his. Mrs. Voss, he said, voice low. The pleasure is ours. The word rippled. Source. Public. Acknowledged. Irreversible. Sterling arrived. Smile lacquered on. Aaliyah, you weren't on the list. I'm a late addition, I said. Turns out I've had excellent availability for the last 6 years. He lowered his voice. We should speak privately. Why? I asked, eyes soft but unyielding. Would we keep telling the truth in corners? His hand twitched toward my wrist, the reflex of an old choreography. I didn't move back. I didn't move at all. My stillness did the work. If you touch me, I said quietly enough to be intimate and loud enough to be remembered. Security will escort you out of your own event, and you and I both know the clip will play forever. Silence. Then, somewhere close, a woman exhaled like she'd been waiting to hear the sentence in her own mouth. Sloane smoothed her dress. Should I give you 2 a minute? She asked, looking from his face to mine, to the nearest camera set to Eleva. No, I said pleasantly. Stay. Stories evolve. Ellison Ward gestured toward the donor's table. Mrs. Voss, Aaliyah, would you do us the honor? I didn't sit at his left. I took the empty center seat. My pulse stayed obedient. A server appeared, hands shaking only a little. Champagne? Yes, I said. And water, please. A woman in emerald leaned across, whispering, We've always wondered why we never met you. You assumed I didn't exist, I replied. Not cruel, just accurate. Now that I do, let's begin again. From the stage, the MC shuffled cards. We'll start with our keynote. Momentarily, the orchestra lost a measure. You could feel the room eating its own reputation. Sterling hovered like a comma that couldn't decide if it belonged. Ellison leaned, voice pitched for me alone. You just altered the temperature of an institution. I took a sip. It needed a fever to kill what shouldn't survive. When the speeches began, I listened with my face, while the corners of the room listened with their phones. Sloane laughed too loudly at a joke that didn't land. Sterling tried to be in 5 conversations at once, and none of them were with control. Halfway through the night, a folded card arrived on a silver tray. A rooftop terrace. 5 minutes. No signature. I found out there are notes you go to because fear wrote them, and notes you go to because your future did. I stood. The terrace air was cut glass cold. The city heaved and glittered below, a living thing that rewarded audacity more than perfection. Ellison followed a minute later, tie loosened, expression careful. I wanted to see if the air tastes different up here, he said. It does, I answered. Less curated. He studied me without appetite. I've chaired this board 8 years. I've watched Sterling traffic in appearances while insisting it was strategy. Tonight I learned where the actual power has been. With the twins, I said first. Then, after a beat, and with me, he smiled, brief and real. If you ever want to lend that clarity to our philanthropic arm, my door isn't just open, it's unhinged. I don't work for doors anymore, I said, but I'll walk through if it serves the right rooms. Back inside, the program shifted. My name appeared on the screen as a last-minute donor to the Literacy Initiative, A. Monroe Family Fund, BK, because I'd made a phone call that afternoon and moved numbers that had sat like sleeping lions. The applause that followed wasn't just loud, it was corrective. Sterling reached me before dessert. The smile was gone. The calculation remained. This is reckless. It's honest, I said. It only feels reckless if you built your castle on shadows. You're embarrassing me, he hissed. 6 years ago, I said softly, you met me in a conference room with a window that looked down on this city and told me our family would be safer if it stayed off the record. You called it strategy. I called it a coffin with good lighting. He swallowed. We can repair this. I opened the clutch Kendra insisted I carry and pulled out a flat manila envelope with a tab that had been waiting like thunder. I already did. He took it the way you take something that might burn. He looked down, read the first line, filed, stamped, indisputable, and forgot to breathe. You can't be serious. I have never been clearer, I said, and I am done providing alibis for your fear. Across the room, Sloane watched her exit appear and took it without ceremony. She was many things, but slow wasn't one of them. Ellison rose at the mic to close the evening and did something no one expected. He thanked Eshipralia Monroe by name for her family's commitment to the city's children, and then, like a man who understood the moment because it was finally true, he asked me to say a few words. I stood to a sound that felt like history untying a knot. I don't have a speech, I said, palms open. I have a truth. Hiding doesn't protect you. It erases you. My daughters are not a liability. My marriage should never have been a marketing plan. And if a room demands you shrink to fit inside it, it's not a room, it's a cage. Tonight, I walked in at my full height. I recommended. You could hear forks settle. You could hear breath come back. You could hear 100 women remembering where their spines belonged. Afterward, Kendra found me near the coat check, eyes wet, grin uncontained. You did not come to play, she whispered into my shoulder. I came to stop disappearing, I said. We stepped out into the cold. The driver opened the door. Before I slid in, I looked back through the glass at a ballroom that suddenly looked small. Sterling stood alone near the bar, envelope in hand, a man who'd built a brand out of mirrors and had just been introduced to glass. At home, the twins were asleep in my mother's arms, cheeks glistening with the sugar of dreams. I kissed their foreheads and smelled syrup and crayons and the future. In the kitchen, under the soft light that has no agenda, I opened my notebook and wrote, each arrived. Then I added, next, build. The next morning, the internet didn't know what to do with itself. Photos everywhere, the red dress, the bob, the quote that refused to shrink. Headlines tried to make it scandal. Women made it scripture. My DMs filled with stories that started the same way. He thought it was just meh, and ended like a sunrise. I turned the phone face down. I made pancakes shaped like lopsided hearts. Amara wore her cape to breakfast. Amina asked if castles can have windows on every side so you can see trouble coming. Yes, I told her, and doors that only open the right way. By noon, an email arrived from a community center in Harlem asking if I'd meet about renovating their reading rooms. By 3, a venture partner asked if I'd consider launching a firm. By 5, my lawyer confirmed the papers had been served. I stood by the window with a mug that had survived 3 apartments and 1 identity crisis. The city looked less like an argument and more like a blueprint. I pressed my palm to the glass and felt its stubborn cool. Not a cage, I thought. A canvas. The city stretched beneath me like a living map of everything I had survived. Each light felt like punctuation on a sentence I had finally finished writing. But the truth was, my story wasn't finished. It had only changed direction. After the gala, Voss Dynamics went into what the press politely called a period of internal restructuring. That was corporate language for Sterling's empire had cracked open. I didn't celebrate. I didn't need to. The world was just catching up to what I already knew. Power built on shame never lasts. By the second week, shareholders were calling me, not as a wife, as an equal. Mrs. Monroe, they said, we'd like your input on the diversity initiative you inspired. I smiled at the irony. Then let's start by not calling me Mrs. Voss. Every interview, every photo, every viral post wanted the same headline, the hidden wife who took back the room. But that wasn't the story. The story was the little girls building castles out of cardboard, the friend who showed up without judgment, the woman who remembered how to breathe. Kendra said it best when she came over one night, hair wrapped, holding takeout. They're calling you a movement, she said. I didn't march, I replied. You didn't have to. You walked in heels and told the truth. We ate quietly for a while, watching the twins color at the coffee table. Amara drew a red dress. Amina drew a crown. I stared at them, knowing everything I had ever done was really for that image right there, black girl joy untouched by apology. Within months, Monroe Studio was born. I designed spaces for women coming out of survival. Our first project was a shelter-turned-sanctuary. We painted the walls in colors that felt like new mornings. Every room had a mirror placed directly across from a window, so every woman who looked at her reflection also saw light. It was slow work, sacred work. And then came the call I didn't expect. Ellison Ward. I'm stepping down from the board, he said. They're looking for someone who understands people, not just portfolios. I gave them your name. I froze. You want me on the board of Voss Dynamics? I want you where the policies are written, he said, where no one gets to erase anyone ever again. I didn't answer right away. The old me would have sought Sterling's reaction. The new me only asked one question. Will it build or just perform? Build, he said, and it'll have your signature. When the press broke the story, the photo that ran wasn't from the gala. It was one I hadn't known they took, me holding Amara and Amina's hands as we crossed the street, all three of us laughing. The caption read, "The future walks beside her." The calls came flooding in. Podcasts, networks, women's conferences, but I turned most of them down. I didn't want the noise. I wanted the work. I'd learned that attention without intention is just another cage. Still, some stories find their own microphones. One morning, I woke to the sound of giggling and the faint smell of waffles. The twins were in the kitchen, wearing my heels and their pajamas. Mommy, Amara said, we're practicing our walk. I leaned against the doorway. Oh? What are you walking into? Everything, Amina said simply. That answer stayed with me all day. At noon, I met with our design team about a new project, a corporate lobby for a firm run entirely by women of color. I walked into that meeting wearing the red lipstick that had started this revolution, hair sharp, voice calm. Before we talk materials, I said, I want to talk message. Every inch of this space should say, we belong here. They nodded, took notes, eyes bright. It wasn't about me anymore. It was about the room full of women who didn't need to ask permission to create beauty. That night, I got an email from Sterling. Subject line, coffee? I didn't respond. Some ghosts don't deserve exorcism. They deserve silence. He tried again a week later. This time he showed up at my office unannounced, clutching a folder like it might shield him. My assistant buzzed my intercom. A Mr. Voss is here to see you. I took a breath. Send him in. He entered like a man trying to pretend he belonged in a place that no longer recognized his scent. You look good, he said. I am good. I read about your foundation. Impressive. Thank you. He hesitated, scanning the office. Warm tones, art from black women he'd never supported, photos of the twins on my shelf. I didn't realize I could build without you? He winced. That's not what I meant. It's what you felt. He sighed. Aaliyah, the company, my company, our company, I corrected. My shares still exist. He looked down. They're voting to replace me as CEO next week. I leaned back, studying him. And I thought maybe you could. I could what? Speak to them. Ease the transition. I almost laughed. You hid me because I didn't fit your version of leadership. Now you want me to vouch for you? I made mistakes. No, I said softly. You made choices. He exhaled, defeated. You've changed. No, I said. I stopped editing. When he left, I didn't feel satisfaction. Just closure. The kind that hums instead of roars. That evening, I met Kendra for dinner. We toasted with sparkling cider. She was pregnant with her first. So, she said, how does it feel being the woman who burned down a corporation and built a legacy in its place? I smiled. Feels like finally breathing in my own language. Weeks turned into seasons. The twins started school. The foundation expanded. And one afternoon, while presenting designs for a museum exhibit about modern womanhood, I caught sight of my reflection in the glass display. Hair sharp, stance steady, eyes alive. The curator beside me said, "You know, people will study what you did one day." I shook my head. I hope they just live it instead. At home that night, Amara and Amina climbed into bed with me, insisting on a bedtime story. "Tell the one about the queen," Amina said. "The one who built the castle by herself?" Amara added. "Yes," I said, pulling them close. "But remember, she didn't build it alone. She built it with love, and she filled it with light." "Does the queen live there now?" Amara asked sleepily. I smiled, brushing a curl from her forehead. "Every day, and when they drifted off, I whispered into the dark, and she's never hiding again." After Sterling left my office that afternoon, the air felt different, lighter but charged, like the moment before a thunderstorm that cleans the sky instead of wrecking it. I closed the door, leaned against it, and let out the kind of breath you only take when a ghost finally leaves the room. I didn't celebrate. I didn't pour a drink or post a quote. I just sat at my desk and listened to the silence. It didn't feel empty anymore. It felt earned. That night, when I got home, Amara and Amina were sprawled on the living room rug with crayons, drawing something big and messy. "Look, Mommy," Amara said. "It's our new house." "What's that in the corner?" I asked. "That's the sun," Amina said proudly. "It never hides." I swear my throat tightened. Out of the mouths of 6-year-olds comes theology. The next morning, my inbox was a flood of congratulations, interviews, partnership proposals. People who once looked past me suddenly wanted to be seen standing next to me, but one message stopped me cold. From press@vossdynamics.com. Subject: Statement regarding leadership transition. I clicked. Sterling was out. Officially, effective immediately. My coffee went cold in my hand. I hadn't asked for his downfall, but there it was, delivered with corporate precision. The phone rang 5 minutes later. "Aaliyah," Ellison said. "It's done. The board voted this morning. They'll announce you as interim chair for 6 months." "Me," I said, startled. "You. They need stability, credibility, and someone the public already trusts. You fit all three." I leaned back, the chair creaking like it was holding history. "Ellison, I didn't plan for this." He laughed softly. "You didn't plan for the last 6 months either. But you handled them better than anyone else could have." I looked out the window at the skyline, the same one that once felt like a cage. "If I do this, we do it differently. No ghosts, no mirrors, no filters." "Agreed," he said. "Welcome back to your own story." When I hung up, I sat there a long time staring at the city. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd spent years hidden for the sake of this company, and now it wanted me to lead it. That afternoon, I went to the office. His office. The walls were still covered in awards and photographs of him shaking hands with men who looked exactly like him. I stood in the doorway for a moment before walking in. The secretary froze. "Mrs. V. Aaliyah," I corrected. "And this space is about to change." I had them box everything. Every framed headline, every ego souvenir. The only thing I kept was a single glass paperweight because it was clear and heavy and didn't pretend to be anything else. The next week felt like stepping into a new language. Board meetings, press conferences, strategy calls. People tested me, politely, quietly, but tested me all the same. Every time they said temporary chair, I heard prove it. So I did. I rewrote company policy so our wellness budget matched our marketing budget. I hired new leadership for community engagement. Women, men, queer, straight, black, brown, brilliant. We started programs that paid for STEM scholarships for girls who looked like my daughters. And slowly the company began to shift. But with power comes attention, and attention always comes with scrutiny. 3 months in, the first scandal hit. A blogger posted an old photo of Sterling and Sloan at a charity event, captioned, "Hidden family, hidden truth." What else was the company hiding? Within hours, the story spread. Headlines questioned everything from finances to ethics to me. I sat in my office staring at the screen, reading comments from strangers deciding who I was. She's just cashing in on sympathy. If she's so strong, why stay married that long? Bet she's as fake as he is. It stung, even though it shouldn't have. That night, I called Kendra. "They're tearing it apart," I said. She didn't sugarcoat it. Let them. You know what happens when people don't know how to handle a woman standing tall? They call her names until they can see her shape. I was quiet for a moment. But my daughters? "They'll see you standing," she said. "That's what matters." She was right. The next morning, I filmed a statement. Not polished, not rehearsed, just me in the conference room with my phone propped on a stack of folders. You've all seen the stories. Here's what's true. I loved a man who lost himself in fear. I raised 2 daughters who remind me what courage looks like. And I lead a company learning how to rebuild with honesty. That's the whole story. The rest is noise. I posted it and turned off notifications. Within 24 hours, it had 4 million views. The comments changed tone. The women who once whispered started speaking out loud. The noise became a choir. The scandal died faster than anyone expected, but the lesson didn't. From that moment, I stopped defending my right to exist. I just existed louder. By the end of the 6 months, the board vote was unanimous. I became the official CEO of Voss Dynamics. Me, the woman who wasn't public material. I walked into my first shareholders meeting in a black suit with a red blouse underneath, a quiet reminder. When I finished the presentation, the room stood. Applause thundered, but inside I stayed still. Pride is calm when it's real. Later that evening, I drove home early, craving normal. I found the twins in the kitchen, painting signs for school spirit week. "What's your theme?" I asked. Amara grinned. "Be bold." Amina added, "Be kind." I smiled. Perfect combo. They went back to painting, and I leaned against the counter, realizing that everything I'd built, the job, the foundation, the image, wasn't the victory. This was the laughter, the normalcy, the home that wasn't a showroom. A week later, Ellison called again. "How does it feel being the first Black woman to lead a top 5 tech firm?" I said the first thing that came to mind. "It feels overdue." We both laughed. But the truth is, leadership isn't a trophy. It's a mirror. Every day I saw my reflection in rooms that weren't built for me, and every day I refused to disappear inside them. One afternoon, after a long meeting, I stepped into the elevator and caught my own reflection in the mirrored wall. I thought of the woman who used to water down formula to make it last, the one who lined forks for peace, the one who believed invisibility was safety. She looked back at me and smiled like we finally understood each other. I whispered, "We made it." That night, I walked into the twins' room and found them asleep, their hands still holding each other across the gap between their beds. I stood there for a long time, memorizing the piece. For years, I'd asked God why he'd let me live inside someone else's silence. Now, I knew. It wasn't punishment, it was preparation. Because sometimes the only way to teach the world how to see you is to vanish long enough to remember how. When I say I vanished long enough to remember how to be seen, I don't mean I disappeared from life. I mean, I stopped performing it. For the first time, my every choice wasn't an apology dressed up as practicality. After the board announcement, people began treating my existence like proof of possibility. Young analysts stopped me in hallways to whisper thank yous. A security guard told me his daughter printed my quote about cages and taped it to her locker. It was surreal, hearing pieces of my pain turned into slogans. I wanted to tell them I wasn't fearless. I was just tired of pretending fear was loyalty. The company thrived faster than anyone expected. But success attracts gravity, and gravity brings new storms. 3 months into my first fiscal quarter as CEO, an investor dinner was scheduled in Dubai. It was supposed to be standard: diplomatic smiles, velvet lighting, deals wrapped in dessert. Instead, it became another test of visibility. At the table sat 12 men, all older, all wealthy enough to believe politeness was optional. One leaned toward me after the second course. "You've done wonders for the image," he said. "Representation sells. But be careful not to make it political." I smiled the way my grandmother used to. "Sweet, slow, dangerous. Existing while black and female isn't political," I said. "It's factual." He blinked, caught off guard. No one spoke for a full heartbeat. Then Ellison chuckled, easing the tension. "You'll learn not to test her," he said. But I wasn't testing anyone. I was just done auditioning. After that night, the international press crowned me the unapologetic executive. I didn't love the title, but I understood why it stuck. Every woman who'd been told to tone it down needed someone refusing to whisper. Back home, life slipped into rhythm. The twins turned 7. Kendra gave birth to a boy she named Justice, of course she did, and my mother finally moved closer, saying she wanted to be where the healing air lives. We'd spend Sundays cooking together, her humming old gospel under her breath, while I prepped vegetables and the girls danced barefoot on the tile. That sound, their laughter braided with my mother's hum, was the truest music I knew. Still, I couldn't shake the sense that something larger was coming. It arrived in an email with a subject line so simple it almost looked harmless: documentary inquiry, global channel. They wanted to tell my story, not just the company's turnaround, the whole thing. The years of silence, the hidden family, the red to dress night. I stared at the screen for a long time. Part of me wanted to say no, to guard what I'd rebuilt, but another part remembered all the women who wrote, "You helped me see myself. If my story could open one more locked door, maybe the risk was worth it." When filming began, I promised myself honesty or nothing. No makeup crew, no rehearsed answers, just me, my voice, and the truth. The director, a quiet black woman named Renee Carter, set up cameras in my home office. She asked, "How do you want to start?" I said, with the part where I almost gave up. And so I did. I talked for hours about the years of invisibility, about nights spent rocking babies while he attended galas, about watering down formula, not because I couldn't afford more, but because I didn't want to ask, about Kendra showing up with groceries when pride would have let me starve, and about the night I stood in the mirror, scissors in hand, and cut away everything that wasn't mine anymore. Halfway through, Renee lowered the camera. "You realize this is history, right?" she said. I shook my head. No. It's survival with subtitles. When the documentary aired 6 months later, I didn't watch it live. I couldn't. I took the twins to the beach instead. They chased waves until the sky turned pink. My phone buzzed nonstop, but I left it buried in my bag. Freedom sometimes looks like ignoring notifications. The next morning, the world had exploded again, this time in gratitude. Millions of views. Hashtags I didn't start. Messages from women in countries I'd never been to. A teacher in South Africa. A nurse in Brazil. A single father in Detroit. They all said the same thing in different languages. "Thank you for reminding us that dignity can be loud." That phrase stuck with me. Dignity can be loud. It became the motto for our foundation's next phase. We built grants for storytellers, writers, filmmakers, artists, who used truth as architecture. Every time we funded someone new, I felt a quiet echo of the woman who once hid behind folded napkins. She would have never believed she'd become a patron of voices. But here we were. One evening, after a long day of meetings, I sat on my balcony with a glass of ginger tea and looked out over the city again. The skyline was the same, but it didn't feel bigger than me anymore. The air smelled like rain about to start. And for the first time in forever, I didn't feel like I was waiting for the other shoe to drop. I was simply waiting for the next beginning. The next beginning came quietly. Not a press headline, not a gala, just a letter slid under my office door. Handwritten, no return address. For the woman who reminded me my own reflection was not the enemy. If you ever decide to build something global, call me. MJ Duval. I didn't recognize the name, but the handwriting was deliberate, elegant, confident, the kind that belonged to someone who'd already built empires. I tucked it into my notebook and forgot about it until 2 months later when life started to speed up again. The foundation was growing faster than any of us expected. We were funding projects on 4 continents, schools, art programs, tech incubators, run by women who had once been invisible in their own countries. Each story felt like a mirror held up to mine. But success comes with weight, and the bigger we grew, the heavier the questions became. How do you keep this from being performative? How do you stay authentic when the world's watching? How do you sleep? The truth? I didn't. Not much. One night, I woke at 3 a.m., laptop still open on my chest, emails glowing like tiny verdicts. I thought about the girl who used to dream of a small house with laughter in every room. Now I own 3 properties and a brand, but peace? That still took work. The twins were 8 now, curious, brilliant, loud. Amina loved numbers, Amara, stories. They'd climb into my bed on Sunday mornings with ideas bigger than the sky. "Mommy," Amina asked once, "what do you do when people say bad things about you on the computer?" I laughed softly. I let them talk until they get tired. Then I keep walking. Amara frowned. "Does it hurt?" "Sometimes," I said, "but I learned hurt doesn't mean stop. It just means heal while you walk." A week later, Kendra dragged me out to dinner. "You need rest, not revenge," she said, stabbing her salad like it owed her money. "I'm fine," I lied. She set down her fork. "You ever notice you only say 'I'm fine' when you're exhausted?" I sighed. "If I stop, everything falls apart." "No," she said. "If you stop, everything finally has space to stand without you holding it up." She was right. She usually was. So I took a break. For the first time in years, I scheduled a week away. Just me, no board, no foundation, no expectations. I booked a tiny villa on the southern coast of Italy, a place where nobody knew my name. On the second day, while wandering through a crowded marketplace, someone tapped my shoulder. "Aaliyah Monroe?" I turned. Tall man, late 40s maybe, dark curls, linen shirt rolled at the sleeves. He smiled. MJ Duval, the letter. He ran a global equity firm that invested in female-led startups. "I've followed your foundation," he said. "It's more than charity. It's infrastructure." I laughed. "Infrastructure is a fancy word for messy progress." "That's exactly why it works," he said. "Because it's real." We talked for hours over espresso and the kind of ocean wind that makes conversation honest. He told me about growing up in Marseille, losing his mother young, and learning that silence is a currency. People spend it or hoard it. I told him about the night of the red dress, the boardroom, the girls. He didn't look impressed. He looked human. That was new. When I left, he handed me his card. "Call if you ever want to build beyond borders," he said. I didn't know it then, but that meeting would change everything. Back in New York, the city hummed louder than ever. The foundation had outgrown its office. The company was courting international partners. Ellison retired quietly, leaving me the full reins of Voss Dynamics. Something that still felt surreal every time I saw my name on the door. The media tried to make a spectacle of my partnership with MJ. They called it beauty and the boardroom, power couple rumors, all of it noise. The truth was simpler. We were allies who understood pressure. And maybe, somewhere under that, something gentler was beginning. One evening we had dinner after a long strategy meeting. He looked at me and said, You know, leadership doesn't have to be lonely. I raised an eyebrow. Says the man who hasn't stopped working since lunch. He smiled. Touché. He wasn't like Sterling. No ego wars. No control disguised as care. With MJ, silence wasn't punishment. It was peace. I wasn't sure what to do with that. After years of being defined by someone else's shame, the idea of being chosen for my strength instead of hidden for it felt dangerous. Not because it was wrong, because it was new. Months passed. Partnership turned into friendship. Friendship turned into something that made my pulse stumble when our hands brushed over a folder. Still, I was careful. I'd promised myself never to mistake admiration for affection again. Then one evening, after we finalized an agreement that would expand our foundation to Nairobi, he walked me to my car. The street was quiet, moonlight stretching long over the pavement. He said, "You ever get tired of carrying the world alone?" I smiled. "All the time." He nodded. "Then maybe next time, let someone help with the heavy parts." He didn't touch me. He didn't need to. I felt seen, completely, safely, without demand. When I got home, I stood in front of the mirror again, the same one where everything had started. The woman staring back wasn't angry anymore. She wasn't waiting for justice or closure. She was living in it. I whispered to my reflection, "You're allowed to be happy." It sounded strange coming out of my mouth, like learning a new word you instantly recognize. The next morning, the twins burst into my room. "Mommy," Amara said, "we saw you on TV again." I groaned, half asleep. "What now?" "They said you're changing the world." I smiled, pulling them close. "Maybe, but mostly I'm just trying to make it kinder." And, for the first time, I believed it. It's funny how kindness, once you start living it on purpose, multiplies. The more I gave it, the more it circled back in ways I didn't expect. Some days it looked like strangers smiling when they recognized me on the subway. Other days it was a handwritten note from a woman in Ohio saying, "I finally left and I'm okay." Every message reminded me, the story wasn't mine anymore. It belonged to anyone who'd ever been told to dim. By the end of that year, the foundation had offices in 5 countries. We funded everything from literacy programs in Ghana to tech hubs in Atlanta. And the twins, they'd turned 9, tall and opinionated and brilliant. They'd begun to understand what all of this meant. One evening, Amina asked, "Mommy, why do people say you're powerful?" I laughed, because they finally noticed what was always true. She tilted her head. "Does that mean I'm powerful too?" I said, "Especially you." Her smile could have lit the skyline. But power, no matter how pure, always brings new shadows. The bigger the light, the longer the silhouette behind it. The first real test came when a leaked report claimed one of our partner firms overseas had been exploiting local workers. It hit every news outlet within hours. Monroe Foundation tied to labor scandal, the words sliced like betrayal. Even though I knew the story wasn't true, perception spreads faster than proof. I called MJ first. He answered on the second ring. "I saw it," he said. "I'm already digging." My voice shook. "They're making it sound like we knew." "I know. Don't panic. Truth takes longer but lasts longer." Still, that night, I couldn't sleep. I sat in the kitchen, staring at my phone, watching the comments fill, with anger, confusion, and a few cruel hopes that I'd finally fall. Every successful woman eventually meets the crowd that claps for her collapse. Around 2 a.m., Kendra showed up. No call, just keys jingling at the door. She looked at me and said, "Turn the phone off." "I can't." "You can. Or you can let strangers write your obituary before breakfast." She unplugged it from my hand. "Sleep." "I'll stay." I did. When morning came, my eyes burned from exhaustion, but my resolve was iron. I went to the office before dawn, gathered the leadership team, and said, "We'll face this head on. No press releases until we've checked every fact. We don't hide, we clarify." For 2 days straight, we investigated. Emails, contracts, on-site footage, everything pointed to one rogue contractor. We terminated them immediately, issued compensation to the workers, and released a transparent report with every document attached. It wasn't damage control, it was integrity. Televised. By the weekend, the narrative had shifted. Headlines read, "Monroe responds with unprecedented transparency." The backlash turned into respect. Even my critics had to admit, I didn't flinch. When it was over, MJ took me out for coffee. He smiled over the rim of his cup. "You realize you just wrote the new handbook for crisis management, right?" I shook my head. "No, I just refuse to lie." He said softly, "That's rarer than you think." Something changed between us that day. Something subtle but undeniable. It wasn't about romance. It was about recognition. He saw the parts of me that no one else stayed long enough to notice. The discipline, the fear, the stubborn faith that refused to die. That evening, I drove home through a drizzle that turned the city lights into watercolor. When I walked in, the twins were waiting in their pajamas, holding a sign that said, "We're proud of you, Mommy." I crouched down, kissed their foreheads, and whispered, "You have no idea how much I needed that." They didn't ask what happened. They didn't need to. They'd learned that strength isn't about never falling. It's about getting up without permission. Months passed, and the noise faded again. The foundation celebrated its 5th anniversary with a gala of its own, one I hosted, one that welcomed everyone's families, especially the ones who had once been told they didn't fit the image. Watching women walk those marble floors, holding the hands of the children they refused to hide, I felt something settle in my chest, peace, but also completion. Later that night, after everyone left, I stayed behind in the empty hall. The lights dimmed. The city beyond the windows shimmered. I thought of Sterling, not with hate, just distance. If I ever saw him again, I'd thank him, maybe silently, for forcing me to meet the version of myself who doesn't shrink. I picked up a glass of champagne someone had left on a table, took one slow sip, and whispered into the empty space, "Here's to the women who walk back into the world unhidden." The lights of the ballroom glimmered against the tall windows as if the city itself were bowing. I stayed until the crew began clearing tables, my heels echoing across marble that only hours earlier had carried women who once hid the way I used to. When I finally stepped outside, the night air was cold and alive. A light drizzle fell, the kind that makes street lamps glow halos. I tilted my head back and let a few drops land on my face. For a long time, I'd thought rain was for cleansing. Now I knew. It was for remembering. Kendra texted, "Proud of you. Don't stay out there freezing. Come home to your real gala, 2 girls and burnt popcorn." I smiled and typed back, "On my way." When I walked in, the twins were camped in the living room wearing my foundation, t-shirts, surrounded by stuffed animals pretending to be board members. Amina was standing on the couch with a wooden spoon like a microphone. "Order, everyone. Mommy fixed the scandal," she declared. Amara clapped. "And then she built the world." I laughed so hard I had to sit down. Okay, board meeting adjourned, bedtime for all executives under 4 feet." They giggled their way upstairs. I tucked them in, kissed each forehead, whispered goodnight, and stayed there a moment longer watching their chests rise and fall. That rhythm had carried me through every storm. When I finally sat in my own bed, exhaustion hit me like a wave. Not the bad kind, the kind that tells you you've earned it. I opened my journal and wrote one line before sleep pulled me under. "Peace feels unfamiliar but fits perfectly." The next morning, I woke before sunrise. Habit. I made coffee and stood at the window watching Manhattan stretch awake. Even now, I still had moments when I didn't recognize my own life. The calendar was packed, a board briefing at 9, a call with Nairobi at noon, and an interview for a business leadership magazine at 3. I'd learned to guard small spaces between the noise. That's where the soul breathes. At 9 sharp, I joined the board meeting. Half the faces on my screen were continents away, but the energy was grounded. We were discussing expansion into education tech when Ellison's old chair, the one reserved for a new external advisor, pinged with a login. A familiar face appeared. MJ Duval. The boardroom fell quiet for a beat, and then someone said, "Ms. Monroe, we assumed you'd already met our new partner." I met his eyes through the camera. "Yes," I said slowly. "We've met." He smiled, calm and infuriatingly unreadable. "Happy to serve under your leadership, Aaliyah." After the meeting, he called, "Surprise?" "Understatement," I said. "They needed someone who understands global scaling," he replied. "I told them they needed someone who understands you." I laughed despite myself. "You keep doing that, showing up where I'm not expecting you. Maybe that's my specialty," he said softly. Over the next few months, we worked side by side almost daily. He challenged me, never overstepped, and always listened, really listened. I wasn't used to that. Men had always looked at me like I was a mirror reflecting what they wanted to see. MJ looked at me like I was a story he wanted to read word by word without skipping ahead. We traveled together for site visits, first London, then Lagos, then Tokyo. Every place taught me something new about what visibility means. In London, a journalist asked why I made motherhood so central to my message. I told her, "Because the world forgets that women lead families before they ever lead companies." In Lagos, a teenage girl approached me after a panel. "They told me I shouldn't speak too loudly," she said shyly. I told her, "Volume doesn't scare the right people." She nodded, eyes bright. "Then I'll be very loud." In Tokyo, while overlooking the skyline, MJ asked, "Do you ever get tired of being the example?" "All the time," I admitted. But I remember what it felt like to have no one showing me what was possible. "So I keep going," he said quietly. "You've built an empire out of empathy." The words sank deep. Not empire, empathy. That was the difference between the world Sterling built and the one I was building. His stood tall. Mine reached wide. By the second year, our partnership had grown into something undeniable. The media whispered, of course, they always do. But I stayed focused on the work. Love, if that's what it was, didn't need a press release. One night, after an exhausting conference in Nairobi, we sat on the hotel rooftop. The air smelled like rain and jasmine. MJ turned to me and said, "Do you ever think about what you'd tell your younger self if you could go back?" I looked out at the city lights. "I'd tell her to stop apologizing for surviving." He nodded. "I'd tell mine that protecting your ego isn't the same as protecting your heart." We fell into comfortable silence. Then he said, "You taught me that strength can be quiet." I smiled. "You taught me that quiet can still be strong." He reached for my hand, not to claim it, but to hold it steady, as if to say we're both still learning how to be seen. For once, I didn't pull away. Back home, I tried not to overthink what it meant. The girls adored him, Amina especially. She asked one morning, "Is Mr. Duval your friend or your story?" "Maybe both," I said. And maybe that was enough. Life wasn't perfect, it was layered. There were still nights I woke from dreams about the past, Sterling's voice echoing, the old house, full of invisible walls. But those memories no longer hurt. They reminded me how far I'd walked. I'd thought power was about having everything under control. Now I knew it was about knowing when to let go. So I started letting go. Of guilt, of the need to prove myself, of the fear that peace meant stagnation. And as I did, new ideas came rushing in. We launched the Horizon Project, a global mentorship program pairing established women leaders with girls in underrepresented fields. Within a year, it had chapters in 15 countries. Watching young women video chat across oceans, calling each other sisters, instead of competitors, it was the purest reward I'd ever felt. At the program's first summit, I stood on stage in front of hundreds of girls wearing lanyards with my logo, my name, and their futures. I said, "Don't let anyone convince you that your visibility is a favor. It's your birthright." The roar that followed shook the room. I saw myself in every single face. When the applause faded, I noticed MJ standing at the side of the stage, arms crossed, smiling like he'd known all along where this road was leading. Afterwards, he said, "You realize you just created a generation that won't need your permission to shine." I laughed. That was the point. A few months later, I was invited to give a keynote at the United Nations. As I walked onto that stage, camera lights flaring, I thought about that first night, standing in a gala I wasn't supposed to attend, wrapped in red, terrified but unwilling to shrink. Now I stood here, same woman, same fire, but free. My speech wasn't long. It didn't need to be. I spoke about empathy as infrastructure, about how inclusion isn't charity, it's economy, and I ended with this. For too long, power has been defined by who gets to be seen. But visibility without humanity is vanity. The future is built by those who refuse to choose between strength and softness. When it was over, the applause felt different, heavier, older, ancestral. I knew my grandmother's voice was somewhere in that echo, humming the same tune she'd once hummed in our kitchen when the world felt small. That night, back in my hotel room, I opened the balcony doors and let the city wind in. I thought about the journey, the girl who'd begged for a husband's attention, the mother who'd watered down bottles to stretch the weak, the woman who'd finally walked into a room wearing truth like armor. I whispered, "You did it." Not in pride, in peace. When the cameras stop flashing, when the speeches end, when the applause fades back into traffic, that's when real life begins again. No one prepares you for the silence after the noise. It's heavier than the crowd ever was. At home, everything had changed, but everything also stayed the same. The twins were 10 now, half legs, half laughter, leaving trails of glitter and unfinished projects everywhere. Amina had discovered science. She'd fill my kitchen with experiments that bubbled and smoked until I banned volcanoes indoors. Amara was pure art. She drew on everything: napkins, mirrors, even my old meeting notes. One morning, I found a sketch of me on the back of a financial report. In the drawing, I had wings. When I asked her why, she said, "Because you always fly back." I laughed, but something about it stayed in my chest. Flying back. She was right. Every rise I'd had came after falling so far I thought I'd never get up. Even now, even as CEO, there were days I still had to remind myself, you don't owe anyone invisibility anymore. MJ was still part of my world, though we pretended otherwise for months. We worked together easily, almost too easily. There was a rhythm to it. Meetings, calls, late-night emails that turned into conversations about everything but work. He had this calm I couldn't fake, the kind that made you forget you were supposed to keep your guard up. One evening, after a long video conference, he called me back. "Do you ever stop thinking?" he asked. "Rarely." "Come outside. Look at the sky." I stepped onto my balcony. The moon hung low and orange. "Same sky here," he said from Paris. "Different city, same moon. Makes it hard to feel alone." For a long time, we just breathed together over the phone. I hadn't realized until then how long it had been since I'd shared silence with someone who didn't want to fill it. Still, I was cautious. Love, for me, had always been a negotiation. Affection traded for peace. I didn't want to owe anyone again. But MJ never asked for anything. He just showed up, small gestures that made big noise. A book left at my office with a note, "Thought you'd like the chapter on rebuilding trust." An email on my birthday, "You don't need wishes, you need rest." He was infuriating that way. Always right, always gentle. Then, one weekend in autumn, the girls were at my mother's. I had the house to myself for the first time in months. He texted, "Dinner? No business. Just food and air." I said yes before I could talk myself out of it. He cooked. That surprised me. My kitchen, usually a battlefield of laptops and crayons, smelled like rosemary and butter. He poured wine, handed me a plate, and said, "You never sit down. Try it once." I sat. We ate. We talked about everything except work, childhood memories, favorite movies, why both of us still believed in paper books. At some point, I realized I was laughing. Real, messy, head-thrown-back laughter. It felt like finding a song I didn't know I'd forgotten. After dinner, we stood by the window. The city glowed, endless. He said, "You don't have to be strong all the time, you know." I looked at him. It's the only way I survived. He He shook his head. Maybe now you can live instead? Something inside me cracked open. Not pain, not fear, just recognition. The kind of recognition that whispers, "It's safe now." We didn't rush. We didn't label anything. But that night I slept through till morning for the first time in years. Weeks passed. The twins started middle school. New uniforms, new confidence, new questions. One afternoon they came home whispering and giggling. Amina finally said, "We saw you on the news again, Mommy. You were holding hands." I blinked. "Holding hands?" "With Mr. Duval," Amara said, eyes wide. "Are you dating him?" The question hit me harder than I expected. I'd spent so many years teaching them that love should feel safe, that they deserved to be chosen, that I'd forgotten I might have to model it myself. I sat them on the couch. "Do you remember what I told you about bravery?" I asked. Amina nodded. "It's when you're scared, but you do it anyway." "Exactly," I said. "So maybe Mommy's trying to be brave again." They smiled, and Amina whispered, "We like him." That was the only approval I needed. Love didn't arrive like fireworks. It showed up in the everyday things. Morning text asking if I'd eaten, a hand on my back when I forgot how to breathe, laughter that didn't demand performance. MJ didn't fix me. He built space where I could heal myself. There were moments, of course, when old fear crept in. Once, during an interview, a reporter asked if I planned to remarry. I froze, then laughed it off, but the question haunted me. That night, I told him. He just said, "You don't owe the world an answer, just me honesty." That honesty grew into something real. We blended our lives slowly. Dinners with my mother, weekend trips with the girls, quiet nights where we said nothing at all. I began to trust the silence again. By the time the twins turned 13, we'd settled into something that felt both ordinary and miraculous. They adored him, but more than that, they watched how he treated me, how he listened, how he never spoke over me, how he laughed at my jokes like they were brand new. One night, Amara said, "Mommy, he looks at you like the world isn't big enough for what you are." I smiled. Maybe that's what love looks like when it's healthy. Kendra got married that same summer. At the reception, between speeches and bad dancing, she leaned in and said, "You look happy." "I am," I admitted. "No qualifiers?" "No qualifiers." She raised her glass. "Finally." I laughed. "Took me long enough." She grinned. "Some of us have to walk through fire to remember we're made of light." That night, when we got home, MJ walked me up to the door. The girls were already asleep. He looked at me like he wanted to memorize the moment. "I know you don't need saving," he said. "But if you ever get tired of flying solo, I'm right here." I didn't answer right away. I just reached for his hand and said, "I'm not tired, but maybe it's time to learn to fly in formation." He smiled. "Deal." Years later, when I look back at photos from that time, the first family, trips, the new house filled with laughter and spilled paint, the evenings, where the girls fell asleep on the couch while we watched old movies, I realized those were the chapters I never thought I'd get to write. They're quieter than the headlines, but they're the ones that matter. Because it turns out love after survival isn't about erasing the past. It's about building a life so real that the past finally stops echoing. And now, when I stand in front of a mirror, same eyes, same scars, same woman, I don't see a secret anymore. I see a legacy. One my daughters will inherit not through blood or fortune, but through example. Through the simple proof that a woman can be both soft and unbreakable. When people ask me now how it ended, I tell them it didn't. It just kept unfolding, quieter, fuller, truer. The twins are 15. Amara paints murals now, whole walls alive with color and defiance. Amina builds circuits in the garage and swears she'll design rockets that run on sunlight. They don't remember the years we hid. To them, the world has always had room for their laughter. That, to me, is victory. Kendra still calls every Sunday, baby on her hip, gossip in her voice, prayer in her laugh. My mother is older but strong, still humming hymns while she braids my daughter's hair. Sometimes she looks at me and says, "See? The Lord never took anything from you. He just waited until you could hold it. She's right. Everything I thought I lost was only being rearranged into something sacred. Work never slowed, but it stopped owning me. I learned how to leave the office while the sun was still out, how to cook again, how to listen to my daughters argue about music and realize that noise could be holy. I still speak at conferences, still sit on panels, still build. But now, when the applause starts, I know how to walk away from it without needing it to follow me home. MJ and I never made a spectacle of ourselves. We just lived. Trips, dinners, long silences, shared mornings where the only sound was the kettle. He never asked for the part of me that belonged to no one else. He just made space for it. That's what love feels like after survival. Room. Sometimes I think about Sterling. We never spoke again. I heard he moved to another city, started a consultancy, lives quietly. I don't wish him harm. He was a lesson, not a villain. Without his shadows, I might never have discovered my light. And me. I still keep that red dress. It hangs at the back of my closet, wrapped in its original silk cover. I haven't worn it again. I don't need to. It isn't an outfit. It's a memory. A reminder of the night I stopped asking the world to see me and simply stepped into the light myself. Every so often I unzip the bag just enough to touch the fabric. It still feels alive, soft, strong, forgiving, like me. If you'd told the woman I was back then, the one lining forks for peace, the one hiding her daughters behind curtains, that she would one day stand before nations and teach the language of self-worth, she would have laughed through her tears. But she walked so I could exist. I carry her with me everywhere I go. Now, when young women ask for advice, I tell them this. Don't wait for permission. Don't mistake invisibility for protection. Don't shrink to fit a story that was never written for you. You can rebuild from the ashes and still smell like roses. And when they ask how I know, I smile into the camera, the same way I'm smiling now, and say, because I did. I was the wife hidden for someone else's comfort. I became the woman the world could no longer ignore. And now I'm simply myself, mother, lover, builder, survivor, whole.